Welcome to Unplanned and Untold, a podcast that dives into the real-life, unexpected twists of facing an unplanned pregnancy in college. Join us as we listen to the unplanned and untold stories of those who have overcome the odds in order to achieve their goals. Welcome back to another episode of Unplanned and Untold. I'm your host, Caitlin Willing, and on today's episode, we will be interviewing a very special guest. Anna is actually a Baby Steps graduate from our hub at Auburn University, and today we will get an inside look at her experience as a student mom and how Baby Steps program provided her with crucial support during her time on campus. We'll hear firsthand about the resources, community, and engagement that Baby Steps offers, and how, in turn, Anna was able to navigate through her own unplanned pregnancy in college. So, without further ado, Anna, thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited.
I am so excited. Now, your son is a toddler now. Is that correct?
Yep. We turned 2 in January.
Oh, listen, I know everyone says the terrible 2s, but I mean, I feel like the 3s are harder. I hate to say it.
I've been told that more in the last month than I have ever in my whole life.
Oh my gosh. I mean, the 2s are hard. Don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But the 3s, I was like, holy smokes. I feel like they just like turned the toddler tantrums up even a notch.
Yeah. Oh, great. Looking forward to it.
Oh my gosh. But they're the best years. Truly. Their personality really starts blooming that age 2 to 3. And you're like, oh my gosh, you're your own little person. Like you have your own personality. It's wild to see it.
Mm-hmm. He's a stinker. He's wild and crazy. And like wants to be the center of the show, all the things.
Yes, I love that. Well, I would love to dig into your story, and I want to take our listeners back to when you transferred to Auburn University, because you did go to a different university first, correct?
Yes, I did. So I graduated high school in 2019, and I finished my freshman year of college, and then my first sophomore year semester. So at Samford University in Birmingham. So I'm from Birmingham. So I was kind of staying in the roots of Birmingham for good and for bad, kind of all of the above. And so then when I decided to transfer to Auburn, I knew that it was going to be kind of a big jump and kind of like starting as a freshman all over again. And I had lived in a dorm my whole beginning of college years at Samford, but I was kind of like moving out on my own, kind of all over again in a different kind of way.
That makes sense. It's almost like you were having to spread your wings and figure out collegiate life all over.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Oh my gosh. So you moved to Auburn in December of 2020.
Correct.
When did you start dating the father of your baby?
So he and I technically started dating about a month before that.
Okay.
So he and I had known each other off and on through some mutual friends, like all of high school. So he was a person, he grew up in Auburn. So when I made the decision that I was indeed transferring to Auburn, he was a person that I contacted initially just kind of as like where do I even look for an apartment?
Right.
So that was what sparked us to ever kind of reconnect.
Gotcha.
And then, how time worked out that I so happened to start dating him right when I was moving as well.
Okay. So a lot of change happening right off the bat.
Yes.
And you find out you're pregnant pretty soon after moving to Auburn, right?
Yeah. So I move in December and I find out I'm pregnant like the last week of April.
Oh my word. So how did you find out? Did you know? Were you sick?
Okay, not really. I'm like an irregular period person. So I technically missed a period. It had been 2 days. I didn't think anything of it. And I'm telling you, something in my gut was just kind of like, just take a test and just kind of see what happens. And so bought the test. Honestly, don't even remember that.
Yeah.
The night, how things like that. Totally.
Just
I have very little memory of it. Yes. And it was the night before. And I knew because, on good old fashioned Google, it tells you that a test is going to be the most accurate when you take it, like when you first wake up.
Yeah.
So at the time I was working at a fitness studio, Pure Barre in Auburn. And I literally was working the opening shift at like 6 a.m. And I woke up and took a test that morning before I went to work.
Oh my word. Y'all who take these tests before you have these major days planned, you're not the first. I mean, I feel like one of our last guests took the test right before she was like walking into finals. And I'm like, how do you just go about your day and pretend like everything's okay because your life has just been shaken up?
Literally. I can remember being at work that day, and it was only me and the owner. And I can remember thinking, like, there's honestly never going to be an easier time to tell her than right now, just because everything's so raw. But then I remember also thinking, like, but I don't want anybody to know before Thomas's dad.
Right.
But I can remember being like 7 a.m. looking in the mirror, just like trying to wipe windows like it was all normal.
Just put it in a box and you will, get to it when you can type deal.
Exactly.
Man, so how did you end up telling the father of your baby?
So I went over to his house that afternoon, and he got home from work at about the same time. So we like arrived back at his house. I remember being like anxious, nervous about it all day. And he'll tell you that in hindsight, he knew something was up that day because he said I was like really nice over text.
Like extra emojis for him.
Yes, exactly. And so then all I say is like, I have something to tell you, and like, I'm pregnant. And then I had put the test in my bag, I think. And he was like, no, you're not. And I was like, look in my bag. And then he grabs it and he comes back. And he was shocked, floored, but he was immediately supportive.
Wow. That's huge. I mean, because it had only been a few months.
Right. Exactly. We had technically discussed, when you're making the decisions that can make a baby.
Yeah.
We had talked about the possibility of like, if something like that were to have happened. So I am very fortunate enough to where we had those conversations technically before a positive test actually occurred.
That's huge. I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like sometimes all of us women who've experienced unplanned pregnancies, it's kind of crazy how we are so surprised that we are pregnant because we know what it takes to get pregnant.
Right,
and
totally.
it is a factor in it. At the end of the day, like we're putting ourselves in that situation. And I always find it funny how we are so shocked in the moment, but that is a huge thing that y'all had discussed that beforehand. And so seems like there was some safety being able to let them know.
Yes, there definitely was.
So what about your parents? How did they react?
So I told my parents probably about a month later. Yeah, it was really, I tell everybody that it was kind of as good as it was ever going to go. Like I knew it was going to be hard. I knew they were going to be emotional. My parents' reaction, honestly, was more shocked to the fact that I'd even had sex than the fact that I was pregnant. Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
So did you come from a really strict household to where they just thought, abstinence until marriage type deal?
Yes, absolutely. Hands down.
Okay. So
and it was like talked about. Yes.
Oh.
And it was talked about. It wasn't like, we're just not even going to touch the topic. Like it was very discussed.
Okay.
Yeah, it was shocking. Like I tell everybody that I could not have really said something more shocking to them than what I did.
Oh my goodness.
I know, my poor parents. I know.
Oh my goodness. But at the end of the day, do they end up rallying behind you?
Oh yes, immediately. They were immediately, through all the shock and through all the emotion, they were immediately like, it's going to be okay. And we're just going to all figure it out.
That's awesome. So where does Baby Steps enter the picture? How did you find out about Baby Steps and how did you end up reaching out?
Yeah. So ironically enough, it's crazy how it all comes full circle. My best friend since like 10th grade, her name's Sophie, and she went to Auburn straight out of high school. So traditional Auburn story. And she was in the Baby Steps on campus club.
Yeah.
So I had heard of Baby Steps even when I was back at Stanford, just because Sophie was involved in it and did some of their little, like helping out at the house and stuff. And so I found out I'm pregnant like late April. I tell my parents in June, and in July, Sophie was kind of like, okay, Anna, like you've gotten your life together a little bit. Let's go ahead and call them. And so I don't know if I texted or if I DM'd them, but.
Wow. So I'm just wondering if this is the same Sophie that I was, really good friends with when she was in college as well. This is kind of like blowing my mind. Long, dark, curly hair.
Ish.
Okay. I'm wondering if it's the same girl. That would be so crazy.
That would be crazy.
Because she also was a member of the club, which by the way, it blows my mind that there are college students. And I don't know if you feel the same way now that you have had Thomas, that there are college students who are wanting to help student moms that have they themselves have never experienced an unplanned pregnancy, but this is what they want to do with their time in college.
Yes. Yes, it's
mind
yeah,
blowing.
it's very interesting. It was always very interesting. She's a nursing student, and so to me, those things kind of went hand in hand.
Wow.
But I feel like even most people in the club that I know are like, biology majors. Like,
Right.
yeah.
So
Mhm.
they just have like this soft spot in their heart to help, fellow colleagues that
Mhm.
are really having a hard time and need a leg up, an extra hand.
Yep, I agree.
So eventually you reach out to Baby Steps. Walk me through who reaches back out to you. How do y'all start conversation? Just take me back to that moment because I find it very interesting when you reach out for support. It's always scary knowing, okay, who am I going to meet with? What are they about to tell me? What resources do they have to offer? I can only imagine how nervous you were when we were trying to reach back out to you.
Yes, it's a very humbling
Mm,
thing to all of a sudden kind of be on, like, I remember during that season, I always kind of felt like the phrase I used was like poor pitiful charity case.
mm,
And so now I was kind of like, okay, like I'm the one who needs help now. And so I reached out again, either through text or direct message, I don't remember, but I got pretty immediate response. I think she immediately, her name's Erin. She was currently an employee of Baby Steps.
mhm.
And she pretty immediately was like, is there anything that you need like today? Like, is there anything that you need right here, right now?
Wow.
And there wasn't, through that, I had been through kind of all of the shock of it at this point. And so then she told me later that week how they were having a coffee shop hop
Mhm.
at one of the local coffee shops. And I remember just knowing that I just knowing that I needed to go. Like I had to do this. I needed to just kind of put my pants on and just go and do it. And I remember sitting in the parking lot and being nervous about the dynamic of like, I don't even know which one she is. Like when I walk in there, I have no idea who she is. And then I remember walking up and she texted me something like in the floral dress, haha. And that was just kind of my moment of like, okay, she gets me. Like she gets the fact that like this is not a comfortable thing that I'm just like, oh, are you from Baby Steps? Or are you from
Right.
Baby Steps? Like it was not a normal, interaction. But she was just immediately warm and fuzzy. Stood in line with me to order coffee, at coffee shop hops. Baby Steps is the one who pays for the coffee.
Mhm.
And at that season of life, obviously you're 20 and pregnant, like a
Yeah.
coffee and a donut is not in your budget of
Right.
life.
Right.
And so something like that was just huge.
Yeah.
And then she took me back and we sat at a table. And another employee or a student kind of resident
Yeah.
that worked with Baby Steps, Sarah, was also, I think, sitting at that table. So then it was the three of us sitting together.
Wow.
And it was just normal conversation. And I remember that was what was the most shocking about it is they weren't like all my friends were still kind of like, oh my gosh, tell me how it really is. Versus they were just like, what you been doing today, girl? Like, yeah.
And which honestly is probably a breath of fresh air
Completely.
because I mean, going into that conversation with somebody you don't know, asking for resources and help, like you said, I can imagine how humbling that is. But then almost feeling like you're on a first date in a way of
Yeah,
like,
completely. That's a great comparison.
like, what questions are you going to ask me? What answers do I need to give you? And I just love that they cut through the crap, for lack of a better word. They cut
Yes.
through it and they just saw
Yes.
you as a normal college student and you felt that.
Yes,
Oh
completely.
my gosh. I love that so much. So classes eventually start, and you go back to school. Are you showing at this point?
No, no.
Okay.
So August, I did not show for a very long time.
Wow.
And I also will say that I did a very good job of hiding it. So August, I was not like my friends who knew, I mean, everybody pretty significant in my life at that point knew. I would say that like most of my friends would have thought something by then.
Okay.
But people who didn't know me wouldn't have known anything.
Right.
I very purposefully wore bigger t-shirts and bigger sweatshirts, all those kind of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I go to class. I only had like 3 in-person classes and like 2 online, very on purpose.
Yeah.
And my 3 classes were right after each other in the same building, very on purpose. So there was a lot of looking back on it. It was so much planning on my part of what those next, 3 or 4 months was going to entail.
So you are very strategic, as a lot of these women are, hiding the pregnancy, making sure you're showing up to classes early so that you're not walking in and everyone's staring at you and they could possibly see that you have a belly. Why? And I just want to hear it from your words. Why do you feel like you took all those extra measures while you were pregnant?
That's a good question. I feel like I knew that people were going to see me and judge me regardless. Um, but with that, I knew there were also, I felt like I wanted to control every aspect of how they saw and how they judged me on my end. So like literally I took one of the Tiger Transit buses. I took one earlier than I should have every single day because I wanted to be the first one in the class. So then when they walked in, I was already sitting at my desk. I wasn't having to walk in front of the whole room. Like it was so planned out. And I really think that it was because I at least knew that if they saw that I was pregnant, then that means they were really looking. It wasn't me kind of giving them an opportunity to see me.
So it sounds like there was a bit of insecurity and somewhat shame that you were carrying with you.
Completely. Yes.
Which is wild and a heavy burden, honestly. Like, you're only going into a few of the specifics. And I love that you remember these things because a lot of times when I interview women, they can't really remember a lot of the details because I feel like you're living in trauma day to day.
Yes, absolutely. Completely.
How do I mitigate what people talking? How do I kind of like what you said, control that narrative so that they only know as much as I'm willing to give them so that they're not running rampant in their head with who I am without knowing me?
Absolutely. I can remember the high school that I came from is a very, very prominent high school of Auburn people that come in. And it was a very conscious effort when I would walk around campus to miss, I would go behind the Haley Center and I would not go through either one of the quads fully out of, I didn't want to see someone from high school.
Very strategic. And I mean, it's not like we are hiding for just a couple weeks. That's the biggest part of this is it's months of strategically strategically, hiding from certain people or just trying to make it look like we're nothing to see here, guys.
Right.
I am a normal college student. I mean, you're pregnant for 10 months. I mean, I know they say 9, but they don't give us credit. If 9 and 3 weeks, make that 10 months.
You're exactly right.
Oh my goodness. So eventually you decide to post on social media announcing your pregnancy. Walk me through that because I believe you did some cleanup, some social media cleanup before you even made that announcement.
As a matter of fact, I did. So I go to class in August, September, October. And I can remember about in October, I was starting to show in certain things that I wore. And I was beginning to have a few interactions with people where I kind of knew that they knew that I was pregnant.
Yeah.
Or it was just sticky. One specifically I can remember at church, a long-term church friend. He's so new. But it wasn't public. And so it's kind of what the heck do we even say? And so I remember I lived probably 2 weeks of that. And then it was okay, it's time. It's time to just kind of be done with that. And kind of get all the weirdness behind us so it can kind of start to seem normal.
Right.
And I knew that I was going to be coming eventually. So I would say back in June, I very consciously started removing followers from Sweet Old Instagram, literally day by day. Whenever I'd see an account that I didn't care about, frankly, that's kind of rough, but I didn't care about it. It was someone from high school I actually hadn't talked to in 2.5 years. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
And the line I always told all of my friends as they kind of watched me go through this process, was if I wouldn't hug them in a grocery store, then I'm not going to let them follow me on Instagram because my life is becoming kind of too much of a scandal that if people are going to be screenshotting it and sending it around anyways, at least I know the 500 people that are sending it around and not the, 1,900 people that are sending it around.
Absolutely. You did your own way of controlling that narrative.
Completely.
Wow. So once you did announce you were pregnant, did your social media start blowing up? How did people receive it?
Yeah. I mean, it was probably, an hour. I remember it was a Sunday night at 5 p.m. when I posted it. And then Thomas's father posted it as well. And I'd say it was 60 minutes of us just like sitting there and like refreshing and refreshing and refreshing and refreshing. And it was immediately positive comments. Like I never received anything negative like that. But within that 60-minute mark, by golly, I can think of off the top of my head right now, the like 20 or 30 people who requested to follow me right then and there.
I believe it. The exact same thing happened with me. I knew my sorority found out when all of the friend requests started flooding in.
Yes.
And even to this day, there are people that I went to school with that I think have finally put the pieces together, and they're still curious about what happened.
Same.
And I'll get those random friend requests that I'm like, oh, I know what this is about, because I don't really know you, but you probably realized I was that girl that got pregnant.
Right. Yes, exactly. You're still curious. You still wanted to put the pieces back together. Yeah.
You still want to hear the tea. And you know what?
Yeah.
Now you can hear the tea 2 years later.
Yeah.
We'll share it eventually, but on our own time.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. So walk me through moving home at some point.
Yeah. So Thomas is born in January. My parents' whole stance the entire time I was pregnant was that they were supportive, period, but they really wanted me to move home. Like that was kind of their resolution to the problem, is we want you to move back to Birmingham.
Okay.
With Thomas's father, without him, kind of that was a whole other part of it, but they just wanted me back in Birmingham, period, because they felt like that you need the support of your family. And they were so like open arms, willing to help. So Thomas is born in January. So that's kind of the backstory, but Thomas is born in January. His father and I break up at like when Thomas is like 8 weeks old. So right in the thick of what the heck is our life right now, you know, with a newborn.
Yeah.
And it was pretty quick. I would say within a week or two of him and I actually breaking up, where I was like, if I there's just no other kind of, you know, way to do it except for me to move home and accept the overwhelming parental support and just family support that I had in Birmingham.
Right, right. Now, was it hard to leave the support system of people like Sarah and Aaron that were working for Baby Steps at the time?
Yes, absolutely. That was huge. I always said the two things I was leaving was Baby Steps and Pure Barre, my job.
Wow.
And yeah, but everybody understood. Sure. Like nobody blamed me. Everybody kind of knew that it was a little bit of a matter of time from when he and I broke up, that was going to be the right decision for me and for my family.
Sure.
And so, yeah, but it was open arms through all of it. And through the 6 months of me even knowing that, like, I'm technically not going to be an Auburn student again. I'll be transferring, back to Samford.
Right.
Even through all of that and me knowing that I wasn't going to be this cookie cutter graduate from Auburn picture, there was still overwhelming support from Baby Steps. I still get texts from the Baby Steps community through the entire season and up until now, 2 years later.
Wow. And there was one piece I did want to touch on before Thomas was born, the baby shower that Aaron and Sarah threw for you. Walk me through just that baby shower. And I know you had another one with friends and family, but what was it like? Because there was so much, you know, shame and heaviness throughout your pregnancy. How did it feel to have these newfound friends throw you a shower?
Yeah, it was huge. It was huge. I think honestly, from that very first coffee shop hop was when Sarah was like, okay, well, we're going to throw you a shower and it's going to be great. And let's go ahead and start talking about it. So I think it was an ongoing conversation, honestly, like my entire pregnancy with them, which was so sweet and so special and such just a level of acceptance that they were not just showing, you know, in their words, they were showing in their actions.
Right.
And so, yeah, that was huge. And Baby Steps moms came to that shower. And that was also such a great thing, I think, for my family. Like it was really kind of like our Auburn shower. So it was like Auburn people. And then my immediate family came as well. And I think it was a really good thing for them to be able to visually see other girls and their babies being right there. And like, you know, they're happy, normal girls.
Yeah.
As well as the staff that was so overwhelming in support with me too.
So you were continuing to go back and forth between Birmingham and Auburn for a little while?
Yes. So from when he and I broke up in March, you know, at that point I had a 2-month-old. And so the whole concept of like custody arrangements of weekends was just not possible. So that turned into, and it's honestly so much for the best, because I think had it been such a hard, clean break of like, I'm living in Auburn and doing all these things. Now here I am moving like all of my stuff. I think it would have been so much more traumatic.
Sure.
But the fact that it was like, I would spend, a week or two in Birmingham and then a week or two in Auburn, in a guest room or with a friend. That was a great kind of transitioning season that I had through all of that.
Wow. And was Baby Steps, people like Sarah and Aaron, were they involved in like helping you balance, Thomas and going back and forth between Auburn and Birmingham at the time?
Yes, completely. They were always two people that I could for sure call on. Whether I needed extra babysitting when I was in Auburn, or whether I needed, something handled when I was in Birmingham and I needed something handled in Auburn. When I was in Birmingham and it needed something handled in Auburn. They were always big, willing to help and support me regardless of what city I was in.
I love that so much.
It's
people
huge.
like that who come along during our most vulnerable times that I feel like make these forever impressions on us. And we turn around and we're like, I don't know how I would have done it like without those pillars of support. And I'm just so grateful that Baby Steps was able to give you some of that support at that time, because your life was turned upside down and then having to balance going back and forth. And eventually you transferred to Sanford. Do you start co-parenting with Dalton at that time, or what does your relationship look like now that you're, when you move back to going to school at Sanford?
Yeah. So I officially moved back to Birmingham. Technically, I moved into an apartment in Birmingham, June of 2022.
Right.
So Thomas was like 5-6 months old.
Okay.
I was spending a lot of time with my parents, but he and I were technically in an apartment. Thomas and I were technically in an apartment alone. Huge season of life, even just in that alone.
Figuring all that out, just you and Thomas.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, huge. And so Dalton and I started kind of doing the whole co-parenting thing. He and I have never had a legal component of our agreement. Honestly, I play that to the fact that he and I just both kind of agree on most things. So we established a pretty cut and dry money, X, Y, and Z that way. He would come to Auburn for 2 or 3 weekends out of a month, or Dalton would come to Birmingham. It was a lot of navigating highs and lows and ups and downs, but ultimately it was pretty civil.
That's huge.
For lack of a better word. Yeah.
That's huge. I mean, I hear of custody battles and going through the courts. It's a headache. It's expensive. It's an emotional roller coaster. I think that's one of the hardest parts about having a baby out of wedlock is figuring out the co-parenting aspect of it.
Completely.
So at what point do you two start going to some kind of co-parenting life coach classes? Or I know y'all were very intentional with that.
Yes. So technically, it was only me who was going to life coach.
Okay.
So I, through my 2-hour drives of Auburn to Birmingham and Birmingham to Auburn, back and forth all the time, I completely connected to all of that. I would listen to podcasts in the car, with a 3-month-old baby asleep.
Yeah.
And one of those podcasts that I listened to was about co-parenting and being a single mom.
Okay.
And her name is Mickey Gardner. I'll swear by her till the day I die. And she has these podcasts where she talks about different topics and brings in different experts and talks to different moms. And she also is a one-on-one kind of life coach with women in the situations that she talks about on her podcast.
Wow.
So I remember one day specifically, I was driving back, like tears rolling down my face about whatever had happened that day with Dalton. And she was like, and I remember at the end of an episode, it was like, and if you're looking for a sign to like schedule a one-on-one conference with me, like this is it. And I sent the email right then and there.
Oh my God.
Like pulling into Birmingham. And so she has a 6-month kind of like boot camp style of life coaching specifically for single moms.
Wow.
And she was, and I'm not your traditional single mom clientele.
Right.
And she was, open arms, and she had so many resources and so many tools. that definitely transpired into Dalton knew that I was, he knew a little bit about the fact that I was doing this. He didn't know the details of it, but he knew that I was doing this. And so when I would try to introduce a new way to communicate about this, or like if we're really angry, we really need to start emailing.
Right.
Because you can send a lot less in an email than you can say, over the phone in the heat of an anger. So like tiny little tips like that you wouldn't know unless you had lived it.
Right.
Were told to me and then enacted into our relationship. And I mean, it transformed my life, transformed our relationship completely.
Wow. So your willingness, not only your willingness, but your commitment to seeing a successful and healthy co-parenting relationship between you and Thomas's dad really turned into you finding resources on your own, digging in and working on yourself. And the fruit of that is a very healthy co-parenting relationship currently with Dalton. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, completely. I mean, he and I, of course, still have our ups and downs, and we will forever.
Sure.
But we have those foundations laid. And I remember my mom was the biggest encourager of like, we just need to find somebody. And, the world of co-parenting and kind of the world of divorce, even though we weren't actually divorced,
right.
Was the world I had to put myself into. And it's a crazy, like, how did I get here life moment, but it's kind of those crazy, how did I get here life moments that like actually enact change.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, it was huge.
That's so commendable because honestly, when your child's involved, you do have a choice. You can make this really hard on the father of the baby, and it can end up being a very negative relationship of like this back and forth tug of war. No, you're going to do it my way because I'm the mom. And I can see that. I can identify with that. I understand where that comes from. But you chose a different path of healthy co-parenting that sounds like has led to even more peace, letting go of that control and learning new ways of responding to his needs and his wants so that y'all's son has the, best upbringing possible.
Completely. Her biggest line that I'll never forget was always like, just because he's angry doesn't mean that you have to be angry back at him.
I have chills.
Yeah. And that was kind of her entire philosophy is like, you can create a healthier co-parenting relationship completely one-sided. And it's all just about your own choices and your own ways that you're choosing to, communicate and enact. Decisions.
I commend you on that, girlfriend. I really
Thank
do.
you.
Because co-parenting is so sticky and so hard, and you have navigated that with such grace. And so I'm super excited that I am sure there are going to be listeners who, just like you, do not want to marry the father of their baby, but don't want to fight with them for the next 18 years either.
Right.
And
exactly.
I hope they listen to this episode and see how they really can take the higher road and learn how to effectively co-parent so that it is a healthy relationship and it's not a terrible roller coaster, for 18 years. It sounds like y'all have figured a lot of this out for the most part, but you're both invested in continuing to try to figure it out.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it.
Huge. So my last question to you would be this one. Sometimes we have student moms who reach out and they kind of want to know a little bit more about baby steps, but then they don't take that extra step. I think kind of like you spoke about when you met at the coffee shop, there's that fear of being a pity case or that fear of walking into an unknown environment, meeting somebody they don't know and asking for help. What is your advice to a student mom who is thinking about reaching out to baby steps, but is kind of scared to do so?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think I would say that it's the biggest choice that you can make for yourself. Because as a new mother, now everything is about your baby. And baby steps is one of the resources that's really about you. And of course, that transpires into a baby. Like the most important thing for a baby is for the mom to be happy. And baby steps is one of those things that is for you, prioritized for you, and is going to just kind of help you regardless. And ultimately, it really just can't hurt. Like even had I gone that one time and not ever gone back, I would have just walked away with two girls who, knew I was pregnant now, but also like the rest of the world was about to find out too anyways.
Right. And instead, what did you walk away with once you left Baby Steps?
Oh my gosh. Confidence and people who had lived and walked my path and come out on the other side of it normal and okay and happy. In my life, I had no example, like nobody in my family had ever really been divorced. And so I had no example of what that looked like or what co-parenting looked like. And to be able to even have girls that was like, if she walks to class pregnant, then I can walk class pregnant too, because they've done it and they are on the other side of it happy.
Absolutely. Seeing other people do things that we don't think we can, it's a huge motivator, and it breaks that glass ceiling of the, I can't do this, that thought process of there's no way, how am I going to do this? Well, if anything, being able to see somebody else who is done that and done it in a healthy way, and it's not kind of like what you said, they're normal. We're normal people.
That was my biggest thing about Baby Steps is I can remember meeting all of them and being like, girl, we'd be friends outside of the fact that we're both pregnant. Like, yeah.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I just want to thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today and, opening your heart and your life to our listeners. I know that there are student moms out there that are going to take a lot from this episode. And I just appreciate your willingness to share everything with us today.
You're so welcome. Happy to be here.
Oh, well, thank you. And to all of our listeners, we hope to have you back during our next episode of Unplanned and Untold. Bye-bye. We hope you enjoyed that episode, as we are committed to bringing you the real, raw stories of those who have defied the odds and achieved their goals. But we're not stopping there. We are dedicated to improving our podcast quality so that we can reach an even wider audience. If you believe in the power of these untold narratives, consider donating or sponsoring this podcast by visiting unplannedanduntold.com.